like you all, I also arrived here as an international student decades ago. I'll not disclose my age, but even though it was decades ago, the memory is still very fresh. The airline that I flew with, Pan Am, doesn't exist anymore. So you get a sense of how long ago this was. But the point that I'm trying to make is, after I arrived at my graduate school, I had no clue what to do. There were some seniors who helped me, but they also had very limited ability to help me. So you are very fortunate that you have today a speaker who's an expert on this topic, has researched this topic, has worked in this area for many, many years, and she'll share some of her insights and tips today. We are also very thankful to the Office of the Provost for co-sponsoring this event. Professor Maressi is here from the Provost's office, and he will shortly introduce the speaker. And we also have Likwan from the ISSC, International Students and Scholars Center. So thanks to ISSC. As you all must have experienced by now, after you arrive, the next part is thrive. I mean, what one needs to do to thrive. And the challenges are myriad. You have academic, social, financial, cultural. So I'm very sure that you will have a very informative, educative seminar. And I would now request Professor Tasfai Maressi, who's the Associate Provost for Graduate Studies, to introduce our speaker. Tasfai?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. My name is Tasfai Maressi. I'm Associate Provost for Graduate Studies. I also oversee international education here at UMass Jamal. Unfortunately, the Provost was unable to join you today because of some schedule conflict. So on behalf of the Provost Office, I want to thank everybody for coming to today's wonderful event. I also want to thank my colleague, Professor Sukusen Gupta, as well as all the members of the Center for Indian Studies and indeed the Center for Indian Studies in general for organizing such a wonderful event. As you all know, UMass Jamal has been trying to increase the diversity and enhance the diversity of the student population here on campus and generally internationalize UMass Jamal. And over the last couple of years, we've seen significant increase in the number of international students, particularly at the graduate level. As of fall 2023, we don't have 2024 census numbers right now, but if I look at the census numbers from last year, 2023, we have about 30% of our graduate students are international. And if you look at the whole student population, about 10% of all students at UMass Jamal are international students. So this number has been increasing over the last few years, and we're very, very happy with that increase. We'll continue to push forward with increased diversity and increased internationalization. And of course, your presence, the presence of all international students, has clearly enhanced the vibrancy of this university, and it has enriched the cultural exchange between our students and broadly the experience of all students, not just international students. So your interaction with American students has really enhanced and enriched their experience as well. So we're very happy to continue to push in this direction. And as you well know, the United States continue to be the destination of choice for lots of international students, either pursuing higher education or any training. And getting an American degree, whether it's at the undergraduate level or graduate level, opens up lots of opportunities for international students. But at the same time, as you have realized, and as Suku said earlier, we went through the same experience that you went through. We were international students at some point. There are so many challenges that come along with coming to the United States or coming to any new country for that matter. So today we are delighted to have Dr. Rajika Bandri, who knows a lot about the opportunities and challenges that our international students face, and more importantly, how they can thrive here in the United States. She is here today with us to share her extensive experience. Dr. Rajika Bandari is an international higher education expert and a scholar practitioner with over 25 years of executive and management experience in student mobility research and data-driven insights, monitoring, evaluation, and impact studies for international education programs, and shaping thought leadership strategy in the nonprofit, private, and higher education sectors. She is the founder of Rajika Bandari Advisors, offering data-driven and evidence-based strategic consulting and advisory services for global higher education institutions, government agencies, foundations, and nonprofit sector. So as you can see, she has vast and very rich experience in this area. She is also the author of the award-winning book, America Calling, a foreign student in a country of possibility. I was also told that her book is available for purchase at the door, and I'm sure she would be very happy to sign your copy. So with that brief introduction, please join me in welcoming Dr. Bandari.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and I realized I should have sent you a much simpler bio instead of that very lengthy and somewhat boring one. But good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here, and really a huge note of gratitude to Dr. Sen Gupta, to Veda, and everybody else who's helped bring this event together. I'm really happy to be with you all, and as I was telling Veda before, I'm not for a moment fooling myself that you're here because of me. I know you're here because of the free food, but while I have your attention, maybe I'll be able to chat with you for a few minutes this afternoon. So, okay, so just to get us started and make this a little bit more interactive, these are 4 individuals that I'm sharing with you. Anyone want to take a guess on what ties them together? Obviously, they seem to be from different backgrounds. One of them, some of you may very easily recognize by top right, but want to take a guess? Sure, maybe if you can guess one thing that ties them all together.
International CEOs. International CEOs.
They are not all CEOs. International, yes, but they're not all CEOs, and that's one of the points I'm trying to make here. But yeah, I think you're getting at it. They're all former international students, but all different backgrounds. Of course, many of you, I can see in this room, are Indians, so you probably know Sundar Pichai, of course, known among sort of the rank of successful Indian immigrants. But there's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, one of the best-selling, amazing authors in the US, former international student from Nigeria. We have Noubar Afeyan, who was the co-founder of Moderna, and obviously shot into fame when the vaccine was invented. He was a former international student. And then Peter Tsai from Taiwan, who invented the N95 mask, which of course today everybody knows about. And then we have these 2 individuals. And they're not up here because one is the former president and the other is running for president. But what's another thing that ties them together? Anyone want to take a guess? Yeah, the parents were international students. Kamala Harris's story is now better known, again, because she's so much in the limelight that a lot is now being talked about her Indian heritage and the fact that her mother came as an international student to UC Berkeley from Madras. But Obama's father was an international student from Kenya, and he arrived in the US along with 800 other, over a period of time, 800 other African international students who came to American universities as part of an initiative that was launched by John F. Kennedy and was called the Africa Airlift. So these are, I share this with you, not because we're going to spend the next 20-25 minutes deep in a history lesson, but to really sort of help you see that where you are today and what you're doing today is really has a legacy and a history and a connection that dates back a couple of centuries. And here are two people who started it all. This is Yung Wing. He is the very first known, documented international student to ever arrive in the US from China, and he arrived in Connecticut and studied at Yale University. But when we think again of what is the story, what's the history of international students like you in the US, it all dates back to Yung Wing. But again, when we think of who next, and what about us, many of us in this room who have our origins in South Asia, this is our torchbearer. And it was a woman named Anandibai Joshi from the state of Maharashtra who became the first international student to sail to the US to study medicine, to focus on women's health and gynecology. And she was India's first foreign-trained woman doctor who wanted to go back and practice in India. It was a very sad story. So she studied at a medical college, which today is part of Drexel University in Pennsylvania. But on her way back to India, she fell very sick and died. But she is actually buried in a cemetery in upstate New York because her love for America ran so deep after experience of being an international student that her husband knew that she would want her ashes and her remains to be both in India and the US. So this is really, as you think about your time here, these are the footsteps that you're actually following in. And that's sort of how my journey also began. And when I think about my own journey, there's nothing spectacular about it. We know that hundreds and thousands of Indian students come to the US to study each year. Since about really the 1960s is when the tide turned in India. Before that, most Indians were going to Britain, again because of India's colonial legacy. But in the 1960s, something changed, not in India, but in the US. That's the last time the US had comprehensive immigration reform, where it reopened its doors to talented students from Asia, who up until then had been barred from coming to the US for a period of time in the 1900s. So I followed in the footsteps of many Indians before me. A couple of my uncles had come to study in the US. I decided to come and study in the US. So that journey was pretty unremarkable. The photo here to your extreme left is of me as a grumpy teenager in school, and then on the day of my master's graduation. But then what really shifted for me was not the fact that I came to the US as an international student to study at North Carolina State University in North Carolina, but that through a very odd twist of fate, I went from once having been an international student, having walked in those shoes, to sort of pivoting and becoming an expert who became immersed in a job where I began to study international students in the US, around the world, to understand their trends, to understand what motivates them. And so it was almost like my life came full circle. And so everything I share with you today, as was said while introducing me as well, is based not just on my lived experience as a former international student and subsequent Indian-American immigrant to the US, but it's also based on all of my professional work over at least the past 20 years, where I've really been immersed in not just the data and the research, but really part of broader conversations on campuses, at the national policy level, with government agencies, around international students, how to attract them, how to better serve them, what motivates them, why are some places not getting enough international students, etc., etc. But, and so after all of this time of being really a scholar, and that's what a lot of my professional work still is around, I wrote this book. And actually being here with you all is a wonderful celebration, because tomorrow is the 3-year anniversary of my book's publication. So I've always been a writer at heart, and I was spending all this time with the numbers and the research around international students, but having been one myself, I knew deep down that we're not telling the true story. We're not having honest conversations about what does the experience of an international student actually look like in the US. Yes, we can talk about data. We can talk about, oh, 1.3 million international students come to the US, most Indian students are graduate students, this and that, but do we know what that experience is like on a daily basis? Do we truly understand what their challenges are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are? So I began working on this book, and one of the other reasons, so a couple of reasons why I wrote it was, again, like I said, I truly felt that the international student story had not been told and needed to be told. But the book also came at a time when things had become very, very difficult in the US for international students, for immigrants, and at a time when the environment felt very unwelcome. And universities were struggling because they were no longer sure whether the US would continue to attract international students. Now, one thing I want to mention, as Dr. Sen Gupta said, like him, my experience is quite dated. So you may well ask, who am I, who came to the US almost 30 years ago, to talk to you all who are the new generation? And obviously, so much has changed, and you all are so much savvier than the international students of my generation, and I don't pretend even for a minute to say that I know everything that's going on with you all today. But here's the thing, I was very aware of this when I wrote my book, so I actually went out and interviewed a lot of international students to fill that gap, and here's what shocked me. Even though all of you all are so much savvier today, so much smarter, so much savvier, so much more technology enabled. Students of my generation were still sitting at the Fulbright Commission and the US-India Educational Foundation in India, or wherever you were getting your information, flipping through those big, thick, dense paper catalogs, etc. There was no technology. The internet had barely arrived on the scene. So that's the time we're talking about. I can see you smiling there. This is very true. But here's the thing, there's a lot that has not changed. What I discovered was students are still really struggling with their sense of identity when they land in the US. There are huge gaps that still remain. And as I think about this, these are areas in which I feel there are still so many gaps for international students. There are gaps at the academic level, there are gaps at the cultural level, there are gaps at the social level, which have existed over a period of time. And then there are challenges around what I call the I word that nobody wants to really talk about. Immigration and visas, and what's going to happen with my OPT. Should I study engineering because I will get a 3-year OPT, but my heart says I want to study the humanities. So all of these things have not shifted over time. They've really remained quite consistent. How they look on the surface may have changed. So with this, I want to talk about, again, this idea of how do we thrive, right, as international students. So one of the big challenges on American campuses is that so much of the focus of institutions is sort of on that entry point. How do we go out and recruit students? Today, India is hot. Everybody's talking about India because Indian students are the largest group of mobile students now to the US, to many countries in the world. So everybody is in India right now trying to attract and recruit international students. Everybody's looking at Africa because guess what? That's where the future youth population is going to come from demographically. So much of the attention is on attracting, recruiting, entry. How do we get them in? But then guess what happens? They've arrived, but very often students are simply left to survive. We've got you in now you go figure out how you're actually going to persist over this period of study or time that you're in the US, which if you're a graduate student, which most of you are, could range anywhere from 2 years for a master's to almost 6 years if you're doing a PhD. So that's a long amount of time. So how do we shift this equation where it's not just about arrival and then kind of surviving, but to getting to a point where you can thrive? And that's everybody's goal, right? That's your goal, that's your faculty's goal, that's your administrator's goal, that how do we get international students to thrive? And at the heart of it is sort of recognizing that for international students, the journey doesn't just end when you're entering, that it's really a pathway. We have to think about how to support international students through that entire pathway of entering the US, deciding to come to an institution, and then exiting out or completing the pathway, just as campuses focus in the same way on their domestic students. So since most of you are students here, what are students going to do about this? What are you going to do about this as you think about going from, well, you've entered now, you may be in some sort of survival mode, but how are you really going to thrive in the US? And so before I sort of get into what are some 6 or 7 tips that I have, I want to talk about sort of almost what I think of as a 5-part model, which really has to do with mindset. Because as I've thought more about these issues, and as I've spoken to so many students, it occurs to me that this is where the differences are that affect a lot of things. So many of us are coming from backgrounds and cultures which are pretty authoritarian when it comes to the classroom. I talk in my book about how, coming from Delhi University, it was frowned upon if I put my hand up and asked a question. And I can bet you that it's not dramatically different today in many colleges and universities in India, because the model is very much of a professor being a sage on the stage, as they say. And then you land in the US, and it's a very, very different culture in the classroom, which is a very democratic approach to really being a consumer of information and knowledge, and the professor is really there more as a guide, as a mentor, and a coach. And this can be very, very startling for international students. It can be absolutely shocking. I remember the day that my advisor, the first time I met my advisor, he pushed some papers in front of me and said, here are some courses you might want to think about taking. And inwardly I thought, what do you mean I should think about taking? I don't know, you're supposed to tell me what I should be doing. But that's, as you all probably know by now, that's not the culture of an American classroom, again, particularly at the graduate level. Modesty. Many of us, especially if you're coming from Asian backgrounds, the less you speak about yourself, the better. You don't toot your own horn, you don't get on your own soapbox, you don't praise yourself. But guess what? In the US, that is a large part of being an advocate for yourself. You don't just sit on your laurels, or you don't keep quiet, but you own up to your successes, you embrace them, and you need to be vocal about them. Many of us come from more collectivist cultures, more community-driven cultures. Whereas in the US, it's a very individualistic approach. This can again be very, very startling for many, many international students, and is manifested at many different levels, whether it is you've never lived away from your family, now you are in shared housing for the first time. How are you going to cook? How many of you knew how to cook before you arrived in the US? Okay, some hands, mostly on this side. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Okay, some of you. How are you going to cook? Perhaps you're washing your clothes for the first time. I know a family in India where they're still tying their kids' shoelaces, but he's looking at top Ivy League institutions in the US. How is this kid going to survive? I know you're all laughing, but this is perhaps resonating because, again, of this big cultural difference of the communities there, the families there, everybody's there doing things for you versus now you're on your own, and that individualism is also reflected in decisions that you need to make, not just about what you're going to eat, but what are you going to study, how are you going to shape this beautiful time that you have before you of 2 to 6 years of being in the US. In many cultures, dependence is highly, highly valued. Not always in the US. Again, the individualism and the independence. Being very independent, again, in how you're operating and getting yourself through life. And the last one I want to talk about is options. There's a famous author, and his name doesn't come to mind right now, but he talks about the paradox of choice. Which means that choice, we think of choice as being something very positive, but sometimes choice can be very, it can make you nervous, because if you're used to having just one kind of tomato sauce in your pasta and suddenly in the aisles, supermarkets, you've got 200 varieties, how on earth are you going to decide? And in the US, we do live in a culture of almost what I would characterize as unlimited choice. So again, how are you going to think of your options? How are you going to make those decisions and manage sort of this, almost this smorgasbord of options, beautiful options that you've been given, and the opportunity to make choices. So I share this framework because this is really important to keep in mind as I sort of share more with you. So the number one thing, as I've already talked about, really being prepared for a very, very different classroom culture and dynamic with your professors, with your faculty, with your peers. And this drives a lot. This can really drive a lot in terms of how successful you will be. Now, the onus is not just on students. I do a lot of workshops with faculty and administrators on campuses. And the flip of this that I talk to them about is you have to understand that students are coming into your classroom with very, very different learning and communication styles. And you have to understand that academic cultures are really, really different. If until the age of 20 or 21, a student has been told, do not question your professor, and next day lands in an American classroom where you're assessing them on how much they speak up in class, there's a problem there. It's not because the student is dumb, but because the student feels that it is inappropriate to question their professor. So there are both sides to it, on what faculty and administrators need to do, but what international students also need to be aware of is you kind of embrace these ideas and think about what are you going to do to succeed. Finding your voice and embracing your differences. There has never been a better time to be an international student in the US. And I say this because the culture and landscape, there's been a huge shift in the culture and landscape of higher education in the US, where it's only over the past 5 to 6 years where we've actually begun to have conversations about diversity, equity, access, inclusion, and more importantly, where do you all as international students sit within this conversation? Do you think you sit within these conversations that happen on campus? You do? I see a few heads nodding. But that's the thing, campuses have not figured this out. Because on the one hand, when you all come in, you're immediately slotted into certain existing racial categories in the US, right? And for most of you in this room, I'm sort of glancing around the room, you will be slotted into being Asian American, or East Asian, or Asian, let's say Asian. Now that comes with its own notions and stereotypes when you land in the US. But what does it mean to you? When you talk to students from Africa, it's a shocking experience for them because they're coming from a country and continent where they are the majority. And they've suddenly landed in the US where it's like, oh, I'm now a minority. What does this mean? And this can be, this can have a lot of, it requires a mental mindset shift and really beginning to understand what these dynamics are like in American society, but also most importantly, where you sit within this. And I will also tell you that there's a different side to this, and I talk about it very candidly in my book, and I will say this in this room because I feel comfortable saying it. Coming to America as an international student is not just about understanding where you sit within the racial dynamics of the US, but it's as much about challenging your own racial stereotypes. And we know that many societies are very prejudiced, very biased, and very often we tend to carry those biases with us to the US. So it's really an occasion to think about understanding American society, but also deeply questioning what are the biases you yourself have perhaps carried with you to the US. And that this is an opportunity to open your eyes, to educate yourself and change. And to find your voice, because this is a great time where there is much more of an embrace of thinking about international students and their backgrounds and how does that fit into broader conversations that are happening on American campuses. Number 3, really, really important. Really owning and experimenting with your learning. So again, this is about, you're not going to be given a prescription to succeed. You're not going to be told, here, go take these 10 courses, go do these 10 things, and boom, you're out at the end of that pathway and you're going to succeed. It's all about how much you own, what I like to characterize as owning your own learning and being able to shape it. And one of the beauties of the American higher education system, which I really think is unparalleled, is the flexibility. You may have shown up here as an engineering student, but nothing is stopping you from thinking about, well, now I'm really interested in ethics, the study of ethics, and how does it apply to me as a future engineer. And you can go take that course. You can adapt your learning, you can adapt your coursework, and it's not straitjacketed. So really thinking about how you shape your learning, how do you own it, and how do you really show up to embrace the pathway you're creating for yourself. Your time here is more than an academic opportunity. I know we all get so fixated on, first off, the challenge of getting here. All the test taking, the focusing on the rankings, figuring out which institution you're going to come to, figuring out the financing, the visa, all of that, and then you've arrived. And it's like taking a deep breath. And then it's like, okay, now I just should, focus on my studies, and then again, I'm out at that end of that pathway. But I would really urge you to think much, much broadly beyond that, because all of those examples that I shared at the beginning, those success stories are success stories not because they're a CEO of Google or whatever, or CEO of a tech company, but probably because each of these individuals have really pushed the boundaries to understanding how can they really take advantage of one of the world's best education systems in the world. Which means that, again, it's not just your academics and what's happening in the classroom, but how can you really engage in all those rich opportunities that your campus offers you to really, really grow and develop yourself as not just as a student who's going to be looking for a job a few years from now, but really as that individual who wants to have some sort of impact in their own lives and in the world. It's okay to ask for help. The reason I mention this is mental health issues, adjustment issues nationwide are one of the most growing areas of concern amongst international students. It's not easy. You've left your home, you've traveled thousands of miles, you're in a totally new context, you may be struggling financially, you may be struggling academically. We've all just been through COVID. It's a very stressful time. And made that much more stressful when your immediate network and cocoon of family and friends is not around you. So this is a growing issue. Campuses are finally beginning to understand that, counseling and mental health services are not just for domestic American students. These issues also affect international students. And my message to you is, reach out, because every campus, and I'm sure yours does as well, has terrific services for students. But sometimes there's this huge hesitation to reach out for help. That if I reach out for help, I'm going to be stigmatized. If I reach out for help, I'm immediately under the radar. Something's going to happen to my F1 visa. These are the very real fears that international students often have. I often say to, when I do a lot of work with international student office staff, I often say to them that, the real issues are the ones your students are not talking to you about, because there's a huge culture of fear amongst international students that we must recognize. And it's that fear that if I speak up, if I share my concerns, I'm somehow going to now be under the microscope in a way that's not going to work well. A practical piece of advice. How many of you worry about funding? Or how many of you worried about funding on your journey here, continue to worry about money? I saw one hand go up, two hands, three, okay, a few going up. People beginning to admit this is always a concern. It is always a concern. And one hand that's really remaining up. Yeah, it's always a concern. So my message to you is, I thought every campus is different in what it can do for its international students, but what I would urge you to do is to really, just as you're being really savvy about finding your way here, be really creative, be really savvy about researching opportunities that might exist for you. You will be surprised that even beyond your campus, there are large fellowship programs, large scholarship programs for international students. Sometimes they're for specific groups of international students. I can name at least 4 or 5 fairly large, generous scholarship schemes which are for women international students. So do your research, keep looking, and be creative about it, because there are more sources of funding than we often tend to think there are. And this is my last one. So some of these ideas came up in the opening remarks, and so I want to close with this. Again, we tend to get so focused on the opportunity for academics, that you're here to get that, what I like to call the made in America, gold standard academic degree that everybody in the world wants. You worked so hard for it, your families worked so hard for it. There's so much at stake for you and your families, and that tends to become the focus. But again, as you think long term, or I urge you to think long term, that this experience is really about you being an unofficial ambassador. And what I mean by that is, and I believe the provost talked about this, that here's a shocking statistic, only 10% of American students will have ever ventured abroad or studied abroad by the time they finish college. So guess what happens to the remaining 90%, and how do they derive some sort of international understanding or global understanding? And the way that can happen is by your presence in the classroom. But here's the problem. In my line of work, we all love to cite the statistic that, international students can help internationalize the classroom, as it's called. But I think you will all agree that there's a big gap to the extent to which this is truly accomplished, because there are huge silos. The American students are all by themselves. You all are forming your own cliques and silos, and as they say, east is east and west is west, and the twain don't meet. So you have to think about how are you going to get out of that silo for yourself, but also it's a benefit for your American students. So it's a two-way street, that both groups of students have to understand what they can potentially gain from the other. I want to talk about the contribution of, again, thinking about this broader mindset of not just the here and today, but what can your future contribution or potential role possibly be. So if we today look at the American economy and innovation, international students to date have created and supported almost 400,000 1,000 jobs in the US through all the money, through all the tuition and fees that you bring in to your campus. A quarter of founders of $1 billion startups first arrived in the US as international students. The whole Silicon Valley phenomenon that we're all familiar with was essentially driven by international students turned entrepreneurs and immigrants. Since 2000, over 40% of American Nobel awardees in the STEM fields have been immigrants, and many of them came to the US as international students. But it's not just about, and here's the important thing, it's not just about the international students who are here and who stay on, people like me, people like Dr. Maressi, people like Dr. Sen Gupta, and so many others in this room. It's not just about those people or the examples I shared. It's also about the people who go back. Again, if we take the example of India, today when you see the phenomenon that Hyderabad has been, or Bangalore has been, and India's own tech sector and finance sector, you look at some of the top universities in India, many of you probably heard of Ashoka University, founded by, its founders were all former international students to the US, and were so inspired by the American liberal arts model that they went back to India and decided to set up Ashoka University. Similar examples all over the world. Ashesi University in Ghana was set up by a former international student to the US. So it's not just about who comes here and stays on and the impact they have, but it's the circularity of impact. It's the people, the unofficial ambassadors, people like you who can have that impact in the future, whether you stay here, whether you go back home, whether you go to a third country. But it's really thinking about how your time here can position you to being that unofficial ambassador and having that life of impact wherever you might go, with the networks you're going to build. So here are some examples. To date, about 600 heads of countries and states around the world were former international students to the US. Over 3,000 Fulbright program awards when we think of the flagship Fulbright program. About 400,000 participants of the Fulbright program currently live around the world. So again, it's that impact of not just being here, but what are you learning here and taking back to whatever you choose to do in your life. And ultimately, it's about thinking of yourself as really being able to have that ripple effect. And I like to think about what we do here, or what we're all doing here today, is really a form of soft diplomacy or educational diplomacy. Because, you know, political leaders will come and go, countries are at war with each other, but I will tell you this, that the history of the movement of international students shows, and this is why American universities are so eager to keep their doors open, is that no matter how many wars have happened in history, no matter what's happened, if students can continue, if the US can continue to keep its doors open to students like you, there will always be a level of person-to-person understanding in the world that really transcends all of the strife, all of the wars and suffering that we're currently seeing in the world. So I want to end on that note, and thank you so much for having me today. And Professor Sen Gupta, I'll turn it over to you. This is a little bit about me. The book, which I see someone's copy here, Kayla, maybe it's yours, or Professor Sen Gupta, your copy. I have a podcast as well where I talk a lot about these issues. I've sometimes had international students on the podcast as well, talking about a range of issues. Yeah, that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for this wonderful presentation. But we now will open it up for questions. Questions from the audience, please. Don't be shy, yes, Radhika said so many times.
And I don't have all the answers, but it's good to have a discussion.
Questions.
Or comments, not even questions. Did this resonate? Something you don't agree with? This is helpful for me as well, because this is sort of my like validation test for some of these ideas, right? That's speaking to you all and knowing whether is this actually the reality on the ground, are there other issues?
And for people like Professor Morrissey and myself, we also want to, I mean, we were international students, but many, many generations ago. Please, please, don't be bashful. Come on.
Yes, please.
Please, go ahead.
What was your major?
What was my major? Okay, so this is a good story that speaks to that point I made about one of the beauties of the American system, that you can, even after you arrive, you think you're going to do one thing and then you get interested in other things and you can shape that path. So when I was a student at Delhi University, I was majoring in psychology. Didn't love it that much because in those days, sort of the primary areas, sort of focus for psychology was either on the mental health side or organizational behavior or organizational psychology. But anyway, I came to the US to study psychology. But what happened was that I began to work with an advisor who himself had shifted course a lot and was doing a lot of work in global development. So I moved very far away from pure psychology. And as a result of that, I became very interested in issues of social and global development and international development, and particularly how education can play a role in developing societies. So my major ended up being psychology and education, but the way I shaped my degree was more like a social science degree that would position me to go into a career as an education researcher, looking at a lot of like policy issues and things like that.
Next question. Yes, please.
Hi, we met earlier. I'm Nancy Godleski, the Dean of the Libraries. And looking at it from the other side, how can we better assist international students as libraries, as instructors?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that. I think there are a couple of areas that come up quite a bit, and so I'll sort of just share a few quick thoughts. I think one of the really, really big gaps is around careers, and that most campuses drop the ball on really providing effective career guidance for their international students, because very often what happens is that the academic department, the international student office, and the career services are just not in concert with each other. And career services sort of throws up its hands because they don't want to deal with the complications of what can international students do or not do based on their OPT or what their aspirations are. And if a student wants to do an OPT, how much is it going to position them for an H-1B? And a lot of the complications that surround, the regulations that surround being an international student. So the approach has almost been to kind of throw in the towel and say, well, somehow the international student office and the student will figure it out. So actually a lot of the burden gets placed on the international student office, whereas what I like to say is that when institutions think about serving their international students, there should be no difference between how they serve their domestic US students and how they serve their international students. I think the career services gap is a pretty big one. Another one is really a lot of work needs to be done with faculty, because there are real challenges around that, on faculty truly understanding some of the backgrounds that international students come with. And I'd like to say that it's very important to adopt a mindset where you're understanding that it's not about deficit, it's about differences. And it's the difference piece that I think faculty need to work a lot on, and sort of truly understanding that the composition of their classrooms has changed dramatically. I mean, if I'm hearing that a third of your graduate students are international, well, the message there is that the faculty need to be thinking about, that's a pretty big group, right? And how are they going to adapt their strategies to meet the needs of that group? So I think that's, again, one part of it. And then the third, I would say, is some of the things I mentioned, that, how to really have an open space for international students to feel comfortable and be able to have candid conversations without the fear of, again, losing access to something or being penalized in some way, but to be able to have honest conversations about actual things that are going on with them, whether it's things on the front of sort of racial and personal identity, whether, a growing community of international students are LGBTQI students. And who's talking about that? Not many people. So identity can mean many different things, right? And, the mental health issues, financial concerns, etc.
Time for perhaps one more question. Yes.
As an international student, what is the most difficult challenge that you have faced?
That I have faced?
Yeah.
I think for me, I will say there were two. Just one. I'll say two. The financial piece was very, very difficult. I think there are more options today for all of you than my generation had. I had a graduate assistantship. I didn't want to overburden my parents. I had a very small graduate assistantship, but I tried very hard to live on that without taking on any loans or, again, taking more money from my family. It's a journey that I detail in my book in excruciating detail, and I even say that in those days, my graduate student stipend actually put me below the poverty line in the US. So I think the financial piece was huge. I really worked hard to fill that gap. I applied for other fellowships, etc., and then things became a little bit easier for me. But I still recall the day where I could not, and I'm talking about the US of the early 90s, I would not allow myself to buy a cup of coffee across the street because I was saving every dollar to go back to India every year to be able to see my family. And people often don't get, especially the devaluation of the Indian currency. And I often say that to my American friends for whom this doesn't fully sink in. Or the US government, where it's very frustrating when they'll say, oh, now we're hiking up this fee by $500 or $80, and yeah, the international student is going to pay that fee. Each dollar is almost 85 rupees for an Indian student. So the financial piece was really tough. And then on the heels was that, I think, the immigration piece. That journey was very, very difficult in my book, and in some ways that's one of the core arguments about my book, that I describe it as, in the US, being the broken pathway from higher education to immigration. That if you look at the US as a country, and those 4 people I shared with you right at the beginning, the American success story since the 1960s is built on the back of immigrants. Now, I'm not saying all those immigrants came as international students, but international students were one large part of that flow. Again, because in the 1960s, the US opened up its doors, there was a huge flow of international students coming in. For many of you, it may have been your uncles and aunts and other relatives who were able to come back to the US. And that's been the success story. But when we look nationally at our policies, unlike Canada, unlike the UK, unlike Australia, which are America's competing destinations, our policies don't reflect that understanding that our universities are the biggest attractor of global talent. We train this talent here, and then we tell the talent, now go back home. Or we're going to make it very difficult for you to stay. And difficult it is. So that was the other challenge, big challenge for me, that once I made that decision that I wanted to stay here, and that's not the right decision for everyone, because we've also seen in the past few decades, a huge flow of Indians back to India after getting educated. But the bottom line being that if you're someone who wants to be here for a while, it's very, very difficult, and it's not gotten easier. So I would say that's, for me, that was the other biggest challenge. I suspect it is for many.
With that, let us thank Dr. Bhandari once again. Just few quick announcements. As Professor Bhandari said, Dr. Bhandari said, the book America Calling is available for purchase at the door. And as Professor Merisi said, Radhika will be glad to sign your copy. And the other important announcement is that Radhika has agreed to stay overnight so that we have another chance. Sorry. We have another chance to interact with Professor Dr. Bhandari tomorrow. This is an event that is co-sponsored by the Indian Students Association, and this is going to be at the marketplace at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. So please come at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. That is a little different from today in the sense that it will be more interactive, more informal, and more importantly, it will be followed by catered, authentic Indian cuisine. So 10:30 a.m. tomorrow at the marketplace. Thank you.